The city of Grodno lies in western Belarus, and throughout its history it's had multiple different rulers, experienced multiple different faiths, and been made up of multiple different ethnicities. It is one of the cities that best describes the historical development of Eastern Europe and is a fascinating and, to be honest, beautiful place. Grodno is, and historically has been, a space shared by many people. The city currently is located within Belarus, but throughout history it's been home to Russians, Poles, Lithuanians, Jews, Ukrainians, Prussians, Germans, and of course Belarusians. Therefore it has lots of different names. I will stick with the anglicised Grodno, but it is also referred to as Grodno, Gronden, Gardinas in Lithuanian, Garten in German, and Grodne in Yiddish. Grodno is produced differently in Russian, Belarusian, and Polish, but they all have a similar base with the term. So the term Grod is a Slavic term, meaning to enclose or to fence. And as Grodno was founded as a fortified settlement, the term is used to mean to protect, with Grodno protecting the land, trade, and people. Grodno was founded as a small settlement on a hill near the banks of the Niemen River. The Niemen runs from central Belarus, flows through Grodno, near Poland, and through Lithuania into the Baltic Sea. Grodno was likely founded in the early 10th century, but its existence was first recorded in the Partition Codex, one of the oldest historical chronicles concerning the history of Russia, Ukraine, and the Slavs, on either the 11th or the 14th of August 1127. Settled by Slavic peoples, Grodno's location to the river, with rivers effectively being the highways of trade in Eastern Europe, and its location to other groups in Russia, Lithuania, and Poland, made Grodno an important trading city for the region. Grodno became the capital of a small and weak duchy, known as the Duchy of Grodno. Grodno was run by a cadet branch of the Rurik dynasty, and was completely dominated by its powerful neighbour, the Grand Duchy of Kiev. The Grodno Duchy actually survived until 1240, until it was incorporated into the expanding power of the region, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. With the arrivals of the Mongols in the region, the Duchy of Kiev was effectively destroyed. The city of Kiev was sacked, and its populations were killed or enslaved. Grodno appears to have missed the Mongol invasions, but with the destruction of the established geopolitical order based around Kiev, the Lithuanians in the north, who were now recently unified under their king Mindaugas, and had defeated the Livonian Order and their Teutonic allies, and now had the manpower and capacity to expand into Black Ruthenia, the name for Western Belarus, annexing Grodno, but also other areas such as Slonium and Navrohadak. Grodno's location and place within the greater Eastern European trading network made the city a place of vital economic importance to the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and would remain so during the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Grodno was the largest city within the Duchy of Trakai, a duchy within the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. The Duchy of Trakai and the city of Grodno were often held by high-ranking family members or even the Grand Duke himself. In 1413, the duchy was transformed into the Trakai Voivodeship, or effectively province of Trakai, after the Lithuanians began adopting a similar administrative system to the Kingdom of Poland, as both Poland and Lithuania were ruled as separate kingdoms, but by the same king during this period, under a personal union. Grodno would remain within the Trakai province until after the Union of Lublin in 1539, which joined the two kingdoms into one state, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The high level of Grodno's importance led the city to develop a variety of royal residences, with King Stefan Bathory making Grodno his royal residence during his 10-year reign from 1576 to 1586. The city was actually the site of some really serious conflict, especially during the Great Northern War, a conflict between Russia, Poland, Lithuania, and Denmark against the territorially ambitious Sweden under Charles XII from 1700 to 1721. Grodno was the site of two major battles. The first battle was the Siege of Grodno in 1706 that saw a really large portion of the Russian army defeated and forced to flee, with the city falling into Swedish hands, which the Swedes passed on to their Polish-Lithuanian puppet. The second Battle of Grodno, fought in 1708, saw a small force led by Tsar Peter the Great fight against another small army led by Charles XII for control over the city, in which Charles actually defeated the Russians in a surprise cavalry attack. The Swedish were ultimately defeated by the Russians at the Battle of Poltava, and Grodno was restored to the Commonwealth. As the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth slowly collapsed, Grodno, deep in the Commonwealth's heartlands, became of increasing importance. During the 1700s, the Commonwealth slowly stagnated due to a series of economic issues, the rise of Prussia and the Habsburg monarchy, multiple wars, political conflicts, and a failed union with Sweden. From 1772 to 1775, the Commonwealth was split between the Prussians, the Austrians, and the Russians over 3 separate petitions. The first petition, in 1772, saw a joint military invasion by the Austrian, Russian, and Prussian empires and saw the Commonwealth's borderland taken. In 1773, the final Sejm, the Parliament of the Commonwealth, was held in Grodno, in which a Russian garrison held the city, while the few senators that attended voted to partition the nation further between Prussia and Russia, leading to the second petition of the Commonwealth. Grodno was then the capital of the short-lived Grodno voivodeship after the second petition saw the Commonwealth's administrative boundaries radically redrawn, but in 1795, the third petition of Poland saw the last monarch of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, King Stanislaw August Poniatowski, abdicate in Grodno, and the city became part of the Russian Empire under Catherine the Great. Grodno was part of the Russian Empire from 1775 to 1915, which is 140 years. Grodno under Russian rule served as the capital of the Grodno province, and as an administrative centre, its population began to drastically rise. During this time, Grodno began to see industrialisation and modern city design with the building of public parks and facilities, and in 1862, Grodno became part of the railroad route between Warsaw and St. Petersburg, making the city a critical strategic location. With state investment, public buildings were of high quality. However, sewerage, public lighting and water supply were not up to the same standard. Industrialisation of Grodno began to occur in the late 1800s, and by 1890 there were approximately 70 factories employing over 2,000 workers. While the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had been a majority Catholic state, the Russian Empire was an Orthodox one, and both Orthodox and Catholic churches lived and worked within the city. With the outbreak of the First World War, Russia came into conflict with the German Empire and its Central Power allies. Russian armed forces saw significant defeats in the first years of the war, and to prevent an encirclement in East Prussia and in Poland, the Russian High Command pulled troops back, effectively abandoning Poland in what is known as the Great Retreat. Grodno effectively then became a frontline city, and while it did hold a really strategic defensive position, its fortifications were only 50% constructed by the beginning of the war. The Russian army attempted to hold off the German advance towards Grodno, but were unable to, with Grodno seeing heavy street warfare as the Germans crossed the Niemen on August 21st, 1915. Russian armed forces were almost completely encircled by the German advance, but managed to retreat from the city, and Grodno came under German occupation on September 3rd, 1915. Interestingly, the fortress at Grodno, while still completely unconstructed, eventuated to be the last fortress ordered to be constructed by the Russian Empire before its collapse. Grodno under German military occupation was just that, a military administration. The city was governed by a coalition of German military organizations and was incorporated into the Bialystok-Grodno district of the Oberost, the Eastern Command district of Russian lands controlled by the German military during the First World War. Under German military occupation, the civilian population was heavily suppressed. There was a ban on the trade of alcohol, bread and potatoes except for German military monopolies, and cameras and surprisingly fishing were banned within the city. Strict food allowances for potato and flour were introduced, and restrictions on the usage of soap were implemented. On June 1st, 1916, Kaiser Wilhelm II visited Grodno on his inspection of the Eastern Front. He toured the city, prayed with German troops, and visited injured soldiers in the makeshift hospital in one of Grodno's castles. With the German advance and the collapse of the Russian Empire in 1917, Germany was left holding huge sections of the East it didn't actually want. As the German Empire advanced into Russian territory, it established military governments with the aim of setting up German-aligned independent nations after the war. Grodno, though, proved to be a difficult case for the Germans, as its population was so heavily mixed due to its Polish-Lithuanian influence. So, by 1917, the city was effectively 50% Jewish, but the surrounding countryside was Belarusian. In Grodno, Poles were the main non-Jewish majority, but there was also a significant number of Lithuanians and Russians living in the city. Now, originally, Germany did not want to hand Grodno over to the newly established Polish state, as Germany saw Poland as a threat to its interest. As we know, there were significant Polish populations living in Germany. This all changed with the October Revolution in Russia and the revolutions throughout Europe, made Germany see the Soviet Union as a threat, and Germany needed a strong buffer state against Soviet expansionism. Poland was seen as a stable enough state and a strong enough state to maintain further territories east, and Grodno was transferred to the Polish, who were backed by the Germans. Now, obviously though, the Germans lost the First World War. I know, what a surprise. And so, with the subsequent collapse of Germany, Eastern Europe was up for grabs. The Polish continued to push east, coming into conflict with the Soviets. In Grodno, a series of factions arose. There were calls for Grodno to become part of Poland, obviously this was from the Poles, while Lithuanians called for Grodno to become part of the new Lithuanian state to the north. Now the Belarusians split into two factions, a pro-Soviet faction and an anti-Soviet faction. The anti-Soviet faction actually split again into two more separate groups, an independent Belarus faction, which supported an independent Belarusian state, and a faction that supported a union with Lithuania in an attempt to recreate the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. As Grodno had been part of the Russian Empire for a significant amount of time, there was Bolshevik support in the city, and the Bolsheviks called for Belarus to join with the USSR. As the Soviets pushed west and the Polish pushed east, Belarus was effectively split between Poland and the USSR, with Grodno falling to the Polish. Now, as Poland fell to dictatorship in 1926, the Belarusian population of Grodno and western Belarus, which was now eastern Poland, were heavily oppressed, especially the Belarusians and the Jews. Jews experienced multiple pogroms, with the largest occurring in Grodno in 1935. Grodno saw really heavy Polonization attempts by the Polish state, and any Belarusian nationalist movements, be they pro or anti-Soviet, were crushed. Now this stood out in contrast to what was happening in the Soviet Union, where the Belarusian national identity was encouraged and anti-Semitism was outlawed. The Soviet Union established the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic, or the BSSR, and the Belarusian institutions and Belarusian political figures were developed by the Soviets. This meant that Belarusians in Poland sought to join with the existing at least on paper, BSSR, and bring Western Belarus into the Soviet Union, while Jews were afraid of the influence that Nazi Germany was having on Poland and saw the Soviet Union as a bastion against anti-Semitism. Now obviously this would be achieved with the Soviet occupation of Western Belarus, or Eastern Poland, in 1939 when the Nazis invaded Poland through the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Grodno was only part of the Soviet Union for 2 years, until the Nazis invaded in 1941. Grodno, being right on the border of Poland, fell quickly to the German advance during Operation Barbarossa, with the city being annexed into the Białystok district of East Prussia instead of being incorporated into the Nazi civil administration regions known as the Reichskommissariats, so Grodno was directly annexed into Germany. One of the lasting impacts of the Nazis' invasion of Grodno was the extermination of its Jewish population. With the arrival of the Nazis, the Jewish residents were herded into ghettos throughout the city. It is estimated that 25,000 Jews in Grodno were killed, either in Grodno or sent to extermination camps. A drastically high number when the total population of Grodno pre-war was only 57,000. The city was badly damaged, with 40% of its buildings destroyed, and the majority of the population fled or were killed, with only a quarter of the population remaining in the city. However, Soviet troops retook the city on the 20th September 1944, and it was reincorporated into the BSSR, in which it would remain until 1991. After the war, some of its former residents would return, including some of the surviving Jews, estimated around 2,000. And while many Poles in Belarus went to Poland, either fleeing, seeking new opportunities, or on occasion being forced by the Soviet government, Grodno remained the city with the highest concentration of Poles in the BSSR. Belarusians began moving into the city, and many Russians did as well. The Soviet Union rebuilt the city from scratch effectively, developing new industries, and the population of Grodno continued to expand. The USSR built multiple universities, libraries, and museums, supported the city's cultural production unlike any of the former city's occupants, and in 1991, Grodno became part of the Independent Republic of Belarus during the fall of the Soviet Union. Grodno was established as the new capital of the new Catholic diocese in Belarus, and today it has a population of 374,000 and is seen as a hub of culture, art, and architecture. Grodno has become a tourist hotspot in Belarus due to its beautiful churches of a variety of styles. We have a mix of medieval castles, Renaissance cathedrals, and Soviet museums, as well as a series of botanical gardens. The city is often referred to as the Switzerland of Belarus. Grodno is a prime example of how Eastern Europe has developed over the centuries, with the city being a mix of languages, ethnicities, and faiths. The architecture of the city and the city structures are reminiscent of multiple different eras, and Grodno is a city with a history of bloodshed, but one of triumph as well.